Good morning. Our first capstone presentation this morning is by Zachary Hensgens, and this is his thesis statement. Certitude in matters of faith is rationally warranted. Please welcome Zachary.
When the angel Gabriel appeared to Zachariah and told him he was to have a son, he responded, "How will I know this? For I am an old man, and my wife is advanced in her years." Gabriel, perceiving the disbelief in his question, sentences Zechariah to silence until John is born. Now, when the angel Gabriel appeared to Mary and told her that she would be the mother of the Messiah, she replied, "How can this be, since I have no relations with a man?" The angel Gabriel said that she would conceive by the power of the Holy Spirit, and in perfect faith Mary responded, "I am the handmaid of the Lord, let it be done to me according to your word." Both Zechariah and Mary's first words to Gabriel were a question. However, they were asked in starkly different spirits. Zechariah doubted the truth of the message, asking for evidence to counteract the problem of his wife's infertility. Mary, on the other hand, did not doubt the message at all, but merely had difficulties in understanding God's will for her. Ultimately, Mary's faith was real because she loved God, and therefore she believed in the simple word of the truth himself. Of course, however, there were reasons implicit for believing in God. Often faith means ceasing to understand, but never opposes our own reason in a deeper, broader sense. Mary was implicitly certain in her faith, a state which just does not overrule, but builds upon her natural reason. In brief, certitude is the absolute acceptance of the truth, excluding all doubt. Certitude in matters of faith is rationally warranted. First of all, certitude is a type of knowledge, and it's based on a collection of experiences. Let's first look at it as a type of knowledge. All knowledge is either apprehending the meaning of things or accepting these things as true. Accordingly, all knowledge may be expressed as a proposition, which is a declarative statement with some meaning that is considered true or false. Propositions are expressed as conclusions or beliefs. The essential element of a conclusion is not so much its truth, but that it's conclusive. The essential element of a belief, on the other hand, is that it's complete. It is a direct and absolute attendance to the proposed truth. Accordingly, a conclusion is said to be conditional, and a belief is said to be unconditional. Furthermore, concluding a proposition does not require apprehending it. Apprehending a proposition simply means giving some intelligible meaning to its terms. Believing in a proposition, however, requires apprehending it, since no one can know what something is without knowing the meaning of it. In the biblical reference I gave earlier, Mary believes in the angel Gabriel because she knows God. Her belief in what the angel Gabriel is telling her is unconditional. Certitude is based on a collection of experiences and testimonies. We think that when we finally say yes to a thing with certainty, it was in that sole instance that all doubt faded away, but in reality, we have been constantly taking in and judging the data that we've been presented with throughout our lifetime. St. John Henry Newman says we do so through, quote, "the accumulation of probabilities, independent of each other, arising out of the nature and circumstances of the particular case which is under review. Probabilities too fine to avail separately, too subtle and circuitous to be convertible into logical format, too numerous and various for such conversion, even if they were convertible. As a man's portrait differs from a quick sketch of him, in having not merely a continuous outline, but all of its details filled in and shades and colors laid on and harmonized together, such is the multiform and intricate process of reasoning, necessary for our reaching him as a concrete fact compared with the rude operation of the logical treatment." Here's an analogy. Logical reasoning is like an iron rod upon which belief stands. It's good. Informal reasoning, on the other hand, is like stringing multiple wires together until a strong cable, is formed. If the iron rod cracks even just a little bit, the structure is dismantled. If a strand on the cable snaps, however, the cable remains sufficiently strong to support a belief. Now, in order to evaluate my claim that faith is rationally warranted, let's consider the arguments of two skeptics, William Froude and John Locke. William Froude argued that doubt ought to initiate inquiry and persist throughout it until conclusive proof is reached, then justifying certitude. He says that evidence will always be limited and man will always be at risk of error. Therefore, this precaution is necessary. The problem, however, is that this doubt would radically restrict most knowledge and entirely exclude religious beliefs, since the subject matter are spiritual realities, things not seen. This only allows space for religious opinions, which really has nothing to do with faith. John Locke argued that the strength of any belief ought to be proportional to the strength of the evidence on which it is grounded. He even went so far as to say that it was immoral to believe in something beyond what the evidence warranted. At face value, this seems sensible, except when we take into account that in any concrete matter, a conclusion will only amount to a probability, since the evidence, taken as a whole, only points in the direction of the truth, but never demonstrates that the truth must be so. This opinion of Locke also assumes that conclusions cause beliefs, when in reality, we only believe in light of a conclusion. If the skeptics were right, there is no firm warrant for praising or recognizing Mary's fiat over Zachariah's doubt. The reason Locke's logic fails is that he treats the human mind like a computer. A computer is a closed system. It only works if you give it strict rules. If a computer has a missing variable, it returns an error message. But your life isn't a closed system. If you waited for 100% data before choosing a friend, career, or faith, you would be buffering for your entire life. We aren't computers. We are living, judging persons. So how do we come to believe with certainty? As I said, a personal belief is not caused by a conclusion derived from the evidence. Certitude is essentially belief that is independent of the conclusion once the conclusion has been made. This can only be investigated with a base understanding of the differences between believing and concluding. We conclude based on the data that we are given. Newman says we have something called the illative sense. It's a big word, but illative just means bringing things together. Think of it as your reasoning intuition. It's that sense that allows a detective to look at 10 small clues, none of which are proof on their own, and suddenly see the truth of who committed the crime. It is that part of Mary's mind that took her knowledge of God's character, the presence of the angel, and the prophecy she knew, and brought them together to reach certitude. Mary's belief was made not only with grace, but also through her illative sense. A conclusion implies the existence of an argument on which it depends, and belief implies the absence of such an argument. Of course, the same person may conclude and believe at the same time, absolutely adhering to a truth and also considering it as grounded in evidence. People often do. That is normal. Nevertheless, concluding and believing are distinct acts. People suppose that since beliefs often follow conclusions derived from empirical evidence, and since the matter of each is the same, the conclusion is the cause and the beliefs are the effect. And just because night follows day, and they both deal with the sky, does that mean the day causes night? No. They're both caused by the same thing. They're distinct phenomena in the sense that we give different words to them, and they are experienced separately. Newman calls the process of coming to a conclusion inference. The inferential method, in light of which an individual becomes certain of what is concrete, is inherently probabilistic. It doesn't follow a common logical rule. Inference is holding the conclusion to be evident on the ground that something else is evident. In the particulars of life, the reasoning is lively, spontaneous, and adaptive. Only afterward the mind reflects upon its own reasonings, making explicit whatever was implicit. According to Newman, at first, we unconsciously take in new experiences and try to make them fit into our understanding of reality. And then, upon further reflection, we investigate and analyze these to better learn and learn from our experiences. In logic, all relevant ideas must be reduced to words. to form a sort of logical staircase to a conclusion. That conclusion may be then used as the explicit grounds for another line of logic, and thus a chain of thought continues. Verbal reasoning of whatever kind will more or less follow this form. For Newman, logical inference will succeed in its purpose inasmuch as words adequately represent thought, and will fail inasmuch as words don't adequately represent thought. Logical inference is bound to hold a conclusion with respect to the prior premises, and vice versa. Newman argues that formal logic is most powerful when it's simple, like in math. Think about the transitive property. If A equals B and B equals C, then A must equal C. There's zero chance of error there because A and B are just empty symbols. They mean exactly what we define them to mean. But life isn't made of symbols, it's made of concrete things. Words are not like symbols. If I use the word trust or love or God, those words carry a massive history and a full range of meaning. But when we try to put the real world into a logical format, the staircase starts to shake. Formal logical reasoning will accordingly be incapable of proving anything concrete as true, but only as probable, because, as Newman says, its premises are assumed, not proved, and its conclusions are abstract, not concrete. Think of it this way. Logic is like a map. It shows you the general way to go. But a map of a forest is not the same thing as walking in the forest. A map doesn't show you the smell of the pine trees, the slippery mud on the trail, or the way the light hits the leaves. It can't teach you what poison ivy is, what edible berries are. This knowledge comes from experience. Newman's point is this. Logic can only prove things that are abstract and not real. As soon as you try to prove something real, like whether the Archangel Gabriel is standing in front of you, logic alone can only get you probably. It might get you 99%, but it can't get you to 100. There's a gap. This is why Zachary stayed stuck. He wanted a map that was 100% perfect before he would move. But Mary looked at the forest, recognized the voice of the Creator, and was able to step off the map into the reality of God's plan. Here's a big question. Is it rational to trust someone if you don't have 100% proof? Newman says yes, of course, provided your mind is prepared for it. Think about it. If you're trying to get out of a basin that's experiencing unprecedented rainfall, and you have to cross a raging river with rising waters to get to the other side, and a stranger reaches out their hand for you to cross, do you automatically take their hand? Might you hesitate and look for an alternative route? Now imagine a trusted friend or teacher offers their hand. What do you do then? You take it. Why? Because you have previous considerations. You know their character. This is key to Mary's fiat. She didn't need new evidence from the angel Gabriel because she already had a lifetime of evidence regarding God's character. Her heart was already tuned in. Newman says that reaching certitude isn't like being hit by a wave while you sit on the beach, more like putting together a jigsaw puzzle. You have all these little pieces of evidence, and they start to form a picture. Eventually you see the pieces are converging. They're all pointing to one thing. Even if you're missing the last 10 pieces of the puzzle, your mind is active enough to say, I know what that is. Logic can show you the pieces, but only you can see the picture. There is a tiny logical jump, yes, but that jump isn't blind. It's the most brilliant thing the human mind can ever do.
We'll begin with faculty questions, please.
Mr. Gray?
Thank you, Zach. You know me, I'm a little bit slow to process sometimes. I was intrigued by your idea of the portrait and the sketch, but I only caught some of the details. Can you give me a little bit more on your portrait and sketch analogy that you mentioned?
Yeah, so, when you reason by strict logical rules, you really only get an outline of what's actually going on in concrete concrete circumstances. So you only get an outline, but in reasoning in an informal way, you're able to fill in all of the details, and that allows you to see the man in the analogy.
So the sketch then is like a chain of logic for concrete things, but I can only really see the portrait if I'm willing to look or experience something beyond strictly what the logic can show me.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Hanson?
Thank you for your presentation. Thomas Dubay in Faith and Certitude argues that the modern skeptical atmosphere leads to an existential boredom, and we never get to the truth, right? And I also have often heard people say that faith is blind. And I was wondering if you could respond to those two ideas, this idea that we're in sort of a state of being existentially bored because we can never arrive at the truth, and at the same time, many of those same people in that state find themselves saying things like faith is blind, or sort of repeating the claim that we can't know. I was curious how you would respond to that reality.
So people who are existentially bored and say that faith is blind, beyond not being those people are trying to come to faith through purely human reasons, and they're unwilling to believe a section of evidence which is based upon knowing faith and being acquainted with your conscience. They're unwilling to accept that, not because the intellectual reasons are insufficient, because there's a latent pride that doesn't allow them to accept matters of faith. And as far as faith is blind, it's not, of course. It's going to be based upon your acquaintance with God's character and your personal experiences of Him and prayer, and a whole slew of reasons. But faith is blind in the sense that, yes, there is a sort of leap of faith that you have to take when you realize that the reasons can't be explicitly made, and you can't comprehend them well enough, but a part of your mind realizes that the reasons are sufficient enough and already there.
Thank you.
Ms. McConnell.
Thank you so much, Zachary. John Paul the Great, in his encyclical Fides et Ratio, opens up with these words that faith and reason are like the two wings upon which the human spirit rises to the contemplation of the truth. I know you read that encyclical at some point this year, and so I'm curious, it seems like in your argument you've explained what would happen if we tried to remove faith from reason. Okay, if we tried to logically make conclusions with our reason alone. I'm curious what would happen if we tried to remove faith, or how should I say this? What would happen if we tried to remove reason and just kind of walked by faith? Does that question make sense?
Yeah. So if you remove reason, like altogether in this theoretical situation, both explicitly and implicitly, faith is going to be something like superstition, right? You have these sort of, they call it fideism as opposed to like rationalism. You're this extreme where sorry, I lost my train of thought. Could you say your question one more time?
Yeah. St. John Paul the Great indicates to us that faith and reason are intimately interconnected, and one can't exist without the other. it seems as though in your argument you've showed us what would happen if we were to remove faith from reason. What would happen if we removed reason from faith?
Yeah.
As in, what if we only walked by faith without using our minds to come to conclusions?
In reality, even if it seems like we're doing that, we're still going to end up exercising our reason, even if it is somewhat subconsciously, and that's how that makes sense in a practical situation. And as I said before, if reasoning was completely removed, which I don't think anybody could actually then it would end up being a blind superstition.
Thank you.
Miss Arnold.
Thank you for your presentation, Zach. Newman describes in his writings moving from the notional assent to the actual assent, and I think you were starting to outline some of those steps for us whenever you were speaking about taking in experiences, reflecting on them by investigating and analyzing. But could you expound on that, like what that looks like for maybe a young person here to look at their life through that lens?
So you're asking what is the process between accepting something in an abstract sense and then accepting it really?
Yeah, within the particulars of like the happenings of someone's life.
Yeah. So if you already accept a truth like in an abstract sense, then your personal experience ends up being a sort of reason, and it tests this abstract idea that you have in concrete reality, and that way you're able to internalize it and realize it as a real thing. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thanks.
Mr. Cortez.
Thanks, Zachary. So you talked about words as symbols. And so I'm thinking about the language that we use to describe the kinds of knowledge and experiences that you've spoken to us about. How important do you think precision of language in that context is for our own understanding? Like, do we need to know all of this vocabulary in order to have the kind of faith and logic working together that you talk about?
No, not necessarily. So, you don't really need precision of language to come to a belief. You get the gist of it when you start out, but once you believe and you're actually trying to understand it further, then precision of language can help you make those ideas more exact. But in the initial coming to a belief, words sort of act as guide rails, but as long as your mind gets the gist of what you're saying, then it can go beyond what words can convey.
Thanks.
What senior questions do we have?
Jenna?
Thank you for your presentation, Zachary. So I was wondering more about that phrase, the illative sense. So obviously it's a sense, but is it something that is developed? Is it a sort of action? Is it a process that you get better at, or is it just kind of an innate thing that we all learn how to do? I'm more wondering about how we use it.
Yeah. So illative sense, by the word sense, I mean it's somewhat parallel when we say common sense or practical sense, not like physical sensations, or sometimes in scholastic theology they use words like your cogitative sense or whatever. That is irrelevant. Anyway, first, it's something that we have already in us. So it's an innate activity of the reasoning process. So it's when you reason about concrete things, but in a speculative sort of way, rather than in a practical sort of way. And you can improve it over time. And as you improve it over time, it becomes more accurate, and it's way of saying, like, this is enough evidence to come to this conclusion, or this is enough evidence to come to this belief. In the same way that you can develop your practical sense for your provings over time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Zachary.